The Spin-off Podcast Network. AI wouldn't be possible without the internet, nor the internet without computers. Computers came from brilliant brains, and even they had to learn that fire was hot and water was wet. The world is constantly shifting, changing, evolving, and Daylight is an award-winning creative and technology studio that helps ambitious clients shift with it. Search daylight.nz to get in touch.
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Can I fill up my water before we start?
Can you have your what?
Can I fill up my water before we start?
So you're going to do a karakia or something?
Why don't I fill up your water?
Thank you.
Once again, Toby Manhire carrying water for Ben Thomas. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Toby Manhire. This is Gone by Lunchtime. Together in the studio today, Ben Thomas and Annabelle Lee-Mather.
Kia ora.
Morena.
It's so exciting to see Ben in real life.
The gang's back together.
Nice to see Ben.
And now we can talk over each other with more.
No, we're doing
more
that right now.
organic way.
I love that.
Without technology getting in the way. Just
without
pure
pauses.
analog double tracking in real time.
Yes.
You can hear us talking over one another without the awkward delay. A lot to get through today.
Did you say hi to Tiahi?
I sort of did, but Ben was talking over me, or I was talking over Ben.
I'll edit it later. I don't know,
Okay.
I'll fix it up.
Okay. A lot to get through. We can talk about David Seymour, we'll talk about polls, we'll talk about health if we have time, we'll talk about the Manurewa Marae report that came out. Annabelle's signalled that she wants to deliver a monologue on Cook Islands. Why are you giving me that look for?
What are build-ups?
And
I'm not going to say anything now.
first of all, I am going to say a few words in promotion of a live Gone by Lunchtime event on April the 9th at Q Theatre in Auckland. There aren't that many tickets left, I checked. So move quickly. You can see the full Gone by Lunchtime live experience, complete with Zorbs, the bad boys of Brexit, Ben Thomas chugging a 2-litre tin of Mountain Dew.
It's an interactive experience. In the audience, you can also talk while we are speaking. So it's kind of, overlaid, and almost sort of like Beach Boys,
Enya.
Brian Wilson effect.
Beautiful.
Yeah. All right.
An orchestra of crosstalk. a live experience not to be missed.
It sounds really interesting, and does sound as though sounds like an evening full of entertainment awaits. We're gonna do some cool stuff. Tia and I have been plotting some cool stuff. So that will be very good. Let's start by talking a bit about some of the activity of last week relating to the leader of the ACT Party and senior cabinet minister, soon to be Deputy Prime Minister, David Seymour. The sort of flurry of things began with the revelation in the Herald on Sunday, I think it was, of a letter he had written sometime earlier, before he was a minister, which is material, on behalf of his constituent, the ophthalmologist. Is that the right word?
He wasn't an ornithologist. That's birds.
Not an optometrist. That's just someone who does glasses, but an eye surgeon. The eye surgeon who was acquitted of on charges of killing his wife, Polkinghorne. Philip Polkinghorne. Thanks, Annabelle.
Go to play.
That was reported, and there were questions raised. A strong column by Audrey Young on that point, that he had erred in that regard. Then, just a few days later, he thought it would be a good idea, in the name of charity, to drive a Land Rover up the steps of Parliament it emerged that despite his insistence that he did not know that the Speaker of the House, Jerry Brownlee, had forbidden such a countryside drive, he had been told about that in advance. TVNZ produced some footage on that front. He then said, in relation to that letter on Polkinghorne, he said that the Prime Minister was not shouldn't speak on matters which he didn't have the full facts. I think those were the words to that effect. Basically,
the Prime Minister had said it was ill-advised to write the letter, but he wouldn't. There was no action to take because he wasn't a minister at the time. And then when informed of this, David Seymour said, "Well, I think it's very ill-advised of the Prime Minister."
Yeah,
and things seem to be
without being full finished. And then Richard Harman, who's seen a thing or two, wrote on his Politic website that this was the insubordination, the likes of which he had not seen since Richard Prebble went on to Eyewitness News and questioned the mental health of David Lange.
God damn. Is that what he did?
He did.
Holy hell.
Episode 5 of Juggernaut, I think that is, if you're interested. And then there was also, again, something that had happened, I think, end of last year. David Seymour had spoken out about teacher-only days at school and his associate Minister of Education role. A whole bunch of stuff. I'm sure there are other things that I've forgotten.
Tim Jago.
The Tim Jago stuff.
That's quite a biggie.
That's quite a biggie. And I mean, depending,
Lest we forget.
There are some who have theorized, hypothesized that part of all of this activity was on David Seymour's part to try and remove the spotlight from that which is the former ACT president, who was convicted of historic sexual assault against 2 young boys before he'd been ACT president. And the questions there are over David Seymour's decision to refer the complainant to an employment lawyer and whether or not that was the correct course of action. All of this taken together, Ben, the sort of running theme in a way is David Seymour's refusal to ever take an L. Like, on none of this. I mean, there are opportunities in various parts of this, not all of it for sure, but parts of it, like, for example, the Land Rover, to say, look, I might have approached that. There might have been a different way to approach that situation. Or the Polkinghorne letter, if I had it again, perhaps I would have phrased it a bit differently, but da-da-da. But none of that, no room for any gap. And I don't know whether that's because he has for so long been the single unitary voice of the ACT Party. You know, there was a time when it was basically just him and, you know, you getting $20 an hour to give him some advice back in the day. And so
2017, I like to think that we set in place some really solid foundations for future greater than 0.13% of the vote results.
But is it because of that he doesn't have anyone? I mean, I just sort of think someone might say to him, listen, David, I think it maybe on this one, it would be a good idea in the interests of the overall, or is he getting it all out of his system? Is it because, is it like, you know, the kids on the last day of the school holidays before they have to go to school, they're like playing up and making mischief. And so before he becomes Deputy Prime Minister, at which point he's going to turn into a full statesman mode, that he is just getting all this stuff out of his system. Explain it to us.
You think this is like his King Henry IV Part 1 sort of hell in the tavern with. Yeah. So who's full staff? Is that Winston? Shane Jones. Wow. It's definitely Shane Jones. and you know, and he's, you know, he's going to break cover in late May and become a dignified statesperson. The Minister for Emotional Regulation has not been having a great few weeks, I don't think. You know, individually, you know, again, you know, the Polkinghorne letter, you know, look, as was pointed out to me, by some randos off Twitter, on the police website, it actually says if you've got a complaint about the police, go and see your local MP.
Well, David Seymour himself made that point several times, yeah.
And it honestly, look, it's hard to tell from the reporting, because the reporting does have passages which clearly are just, you know, he says, he thinks, my constituent told me. And then there's a couple of things where it sort of sounds a little bit more like he's taking a position as the MP and stating stuff as fact. Now,
the Herald,
maybe
just
it's
by the
different
way,
context.
the Herald has published the full exchange. Partly in a response to, the sort of what appeared to be an implication that the full facts were not out there.
Like David Seymour, I had already moved on. So I'd already jumped in the political commentary mobile and done a ram raid on Parliament steps. Yes, no. So,
but you're right. There are you read it, and there are parts of it that seem to shift effortlessly from "I am representing the position of my constituent" to "Listen, police, get your act together."
Yeah, which you want to stay away from. Look, there's no red line saying that as an MP you can never criticise a police investigation. You know, I mean, I think there's plenty of times where that would be, appropriate. You know, for instance, we've seen things like police surveillance of, was it people against prisons Aotearoa or something, had their phones tapped. Totally legitimate for people to get in and criticise that kind of thing. But in terms of an active investigation where the complaint seems to be this person is really, this person finds your constant questioning about the dead body in his home very inconvenient. Does seem a little sort of the driving the Land Rover up the steps of Parliament, again a funny one, because initially he said, well, I didn't know. And look, as Graham Edgeler pointed out, again on X, the Everything app, I think the steps of Parliament may be a legal road in the sense that they are a place where people are normally the public is normally allowed to access. In the same way that we learn in the road code that a beach is a road. But at the same time, a little cute to be them posting on Facebook and saying, this is exactly an example of the sort of thing that's holding our country back.
The idea that, this ridiculous red tape, not allowing me to drive my Land Rover up the steps.
How much productivity do we lose by couriers having to get out of their vans and deliver a package to me rather than careening through the front window of my house?
That's such a good point.
Just heaving it out the driver's side window at my head on the couch.
So true.
Annabelle?
I think that it comes back to what you said before, Tobe, which is that he has basically been a one-man band for a very, very long time. And then when he got a band, he was still on lead vocals. And I think he is a person who chafes under any type of control or decorum or, expectation being put on him, which is why, I thought that Luxon's comments about it being ill-advised, by comparison to the comments that Audrey Young made in her article, it was a blistering article in criticism of Seymour. Luxon's criticism, I thought, was very light and fair, and instead of, like you say, taking an L on it, he comes out and really takahis on the mana of Luxon again. So I think that, he is a person who, when you're in opposition, you're not under as much scrutiny. For a long time, he was on his own, and he's just finding it very, very difficult to be a team player or to exercise some judgment about which battles to fight and which to avoid. I don't think, obviously, Polkinghorne wasn't the politics of distraction in terms of Jago because it happened such a long time ago, but it is kind of playing into his libertarian views about, the police coming in and hassling this poor guy who's, through no fault of his own, has a dead body in his house, and now police want to know everything about it. The steps of Parliament stuff, I do think that there was some politics of distraction going on. He's very reluctant to talk to the Jago stuff. Also, very reluctant to really engage on the school lunches stuff, which is also a major problem for him, because whatever you might think about the Polkinghorne trial and that, what people do feel deeply uncomfortable with is that this kai that's being served up to our kids that we are paying for as taxpayers. And I don't think anyone feels good about kids going hungry at school.
It is one of the school lunches story. And David Seymour's decision to take that on personally as a mission to save money but still provide the school lunches has risks attached to it. And notwithstanding, was it Aisha Verrill? There was one lady.
Oh, Giantonetti.
Sorry, Giantonetti, forgive me, Aisha Verrill, who posted a picture saying, "Look at this appalling school lunch," only to be informed that it was the school lunch that was produced under the Labour government, and then deleted the picture. But it is such a visual, accessible, relatable, the lunchbox that your child is being, it sort of brings together a whole lot of different strands, a whole lot of different issues, and in a way that's a riskier one than many of the other more, I guess, arcane or esoteric issues.
I think too, it's like it was his first opportunity to show us what he can do as a minister, like something that has actual tangible results, like getting in there, rolling up your sleeves, negotiating new contracts, and voila, at the end you get the, whatever the results is, and the result is not good, it's gross. It's visually appalling, and it does not reflect well on him to get business done. And I think he's very aware of that.
Yeah, the school lunches thing is an interesting sort of like micro case study in how do you get this kind of, which is the centre right is always looking for. How do you get the same or more for less? And I can't remember what the saving was. It was about sort of 30%,
30 or 40%. Yeah.
It was a big saving.
Yeah.
And it seemed, initially the suggestion was that school lunches were going to be, the provision to schools was going to be cut by 30 or 40%. Instead, Seymour, lets the market to get to its work, get some tenders. And, efficiencies in competition have led to we can provide the same number of lunches for much lower cost, $3 per lunch. So you would say, look, this is a great win for trimming the fat of government. Trimming the fat, trimming the micronutrients, trimming
Flavour. Yeah.
and what happens is, you get this kind of honestly very difficult to tell what's meat and what's some sort of legume that's squashed together. And look, that's, I'm not sure that people in hospitals get any better food. I think might be the same provider. But there's obviously now been a compromise between, there are limits to how much waste you can cut, and I think that's a pretty enduring parable if what you're looking for is a parable rather than, the day-to-day account of what people are eating for lunch in schools. But big problems, especially the late deliveries. I mean, totally useless. At least if your squashed bean ball arrives on time, you can eat it.
Also creates more cost for the school, right? Because if you've got all of this leftover kai that you're now stuck with that you have to dispose of.
Well, that's a problem for schools. Absolutely.
That becomes a big problem for schools.
And that puts a cost on the schools. Yeah, you're right. And so, I think Seymour seems to have been moving pretty quickly on this. I know he was alerted to it before it sort of hit the headlines. But look, I mean, this is something that they've got to get a handle on, and they need to be really riding the provider hard, because a lot rides on this. A lot of Seymour's big speech for his State of the Nation was, if we outsource these government services, we can get more for less, and you don't want the bean paste to be.
Well, he's put himself.
Your example for that.
He's put himself in a difficult position because I think I'm right in saying that the position of the ACT Party before the election was that the state should not be providing lunches and that parents should be providing lunches, and that's the line that he'd probably prefer to be prosecuting rather than, as you say, the detail on the whether or not that is food or is it food or isn't it food in that Tupperware container.
And there is another question: should it have been should they have just done what people were actually more worried about initially, which is, cut the number of schools that you're giving it to. So you are just giving it to, the most identified as in need schools, as opposed to sending it to schools where, there might be a much lower proportion of people who are actually taking it up. So, those are all policy questions.
The Labour Party had a field day after the sort of Festival of David Seymour stuff, and particularly on the Land Rover and the letter, which it's worth just underscoring was written before David Seymour was a minister, and in fact before Polkinghorne was officially a suspect. I just think that's worth noting in passing. But one of the comebacks from Christopher Luxon, which was perhaps a slight own goal, was he said, I will say to you when you challenge me, I'd say, well, Stuart Nash, Michael Wood, Mecca Fighter. And it's kind of like, they all got sacked. Great point. Yeah. But Luxon seemed quite chipper in the last few weeks to me, watching him doing stand-ups and in Parliament. He doesn't seem too worn down by what have been some quite troubling polls for the National Party, especially, Annabelle. There were sort of three that came in a cluster. There was the One News Varian, there was Talbot Mills, which was leaked, and there was the Courier for the Taxpayers Union, and all of I don't think National would have been out on all of them. Maybe two of the three, but
in Taxpayers Union, where the government wasn't out, National was below Labour in polling,
right?
And in the late 20s.
So taken together, they showed
the Courier poll had the government out.
Oh no! Wait! There's been a subsequent Courier poll. No, so
yeah.
all three of those, have had.
I mean,
Sorry, my apologies.
Don't apologise, Ben. It's okay. None of us is perfect. The taken together though, the consistent theme was National struggling more than its coalition partners, who have, interestingly and unusually in the MMP era, neither ACT nor New Zealand First, as far as I can recall, has slipped under that 5% in polling since the election.
New Zealand First, there might have been one poll where they were
was
a little bit under.
Yeah. But National's struggling, and Christopher Luxon's personal polling is struggling. It's not as though the other Chris is stratospheric. The New Zealand electorate doesn't seem to be super pro-Chris in any way at the moment.
They love Chloe, though. They love Chloe more than David.
More than Winston Peters as well.
And Winston Peters, I thought that was interesting.
Is it alarm bells stuff, Annabelle? I mean, the kind of consistent refrain on stuff like this is that, well, when the economy turns, if interest rates are going to have a 50 basis point cut in a fortnight, people are going to get some confidence. Business confidence is looking better. I think Daniel McLaughlin put it quite well in a listener column last year that the National Party had seen its main ambition in the first year in power to be there waiting for the economy to get better. Is it more complex than that? We're going to talk about health in a minute,
I think it is alarm bells. I think it is alarm bells because, this, but perhaps not surprising, because this was a government that required three coalition partners to cobble together the numbers to form a government. And I think when you reflect back on that election, that perhaps the results were less a vote of endorsement for National and more a reflection of the frustration many New Zealanders felt with Labour ministers at the time who were completely unravelling. So I'm not surprised to see, given how tough an economic environment we're in, that this coalition is struggling, and I think that it's probably the start of a pattern that we're going to see repeating unless they can pull some rabbits out of the hat. Yes, interest rates are due to come down, but who knows how long that will last given what's happening in the US with tariffs and all of that stuff. It could drive inflation right back up again. We have a grocery commissioner, but it's $10 to buy a block of butter. No one's feeling particularly great about their lot at the moment, except perhaps for the small group of landlords who got, big tax exemptions or however you describe it some time ago. Contrary to popular belief, the downward pressure on rents hasn't happened, and there's now been a number of reports now to show that rent prices continue to soar. So people are doing it tough. The most recent one being by the Salvation Army. So until you can start to shift those metrics for people in a tangible, real way, again, you've got all the trouble with the health system. I think that they will be worried, and I think that we could see this slowly chipping away at their very thin majority.
Hey, it's Haley Steinfeld. When everything requires your attention, it can be tough to figure out what to prioritize. But I'm here to talk to you about something that you should always put first, your breast health. In fact, if you're 40 and over, you should be getting screened once a year. And if you're under 40, it's never too soon to visit yourattentionplease.com to learn about your breast cancer risk. So go on, pay the girls some attention and take the time to find out your breast cancer risk at yourattentionplease.com. Trust me, your future self will thank you.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
This episode is brought to you by Abercrombie. Build your fits of the day with Abercrombie's newest denim drop. Here's where to start. Abercrombie's 90s straight jean goes with any shirt from tees to sweater polos. Super versatile. Their loose and baggy jeans are more trend forward, so you can grab those and go out with your friends. Abercrombie's denim fits come in a range of washes. Build your looks around Abercrombie denim. Shop online or in-store.
Ben, there aren't, as far as I'm aware, rumblings of any meaningful noise around Christopher Luxon's leadership. If we were in Australia, there probably would be. If Annabelle just mentioned that Chloe's doing quite well in the polls. If Nicola Willis started, reaching up towards 8, 9, 10% in the preferred prime minister, then there would be. How secure do you think Christopher Luxon is? Is there any risk at all?
Yeah, look, I'd sort of refine what you just said and say there's no talk, as far as I'm aware, of anyone, rolling or overthrowing Luxon. There is plenty of talk about Luxon's leadership and about his polling. And I think it's becoming pretty much common wisdom that the two big drags on Nationals polling are, first of all, the economy, first and foremost, like Annabelle was saying. Second of all, Luxon's leadership, and that's for a variety of reasons. First, he doesn't, for a combination of factors, the combined vote of his two partners, the unique three-way nature of the coalition, the fact that Seymour and Peters are more experienced politicians who are able to take more extreme positions in a time where lots of people are looking for more extreme positions all around the world. For those reasons, Luxon is sort of, like people used to describe Noel Gallagher, the kind of shadow frontman of Oasis. He was right there out the front singing, but everyone knew Noel was sort of, he's first amongst equal. He's not the sort of god king who sort of rules over all. And, that is a problem for National. In tough economic times, just the general wear of it, the general wear of the cost of living crisis, which has been going on for a long time now. Inflation is back under control, but prices are still high, of course. Unemployment is going up. People are feeling nervous. We haven't seen the full impact, and we won't until the end of the year really see the full impact of those interest rate cuts and people going onto lower rate fixed mortgages. Brad Olson, I think, had this figure of $45 million a year extra into the economy by the end of the year as a result of that. There are some, green shoots, as the government might say, record high milk payouts, I think, or milk powder payouts. But fundamentally, look, National owns the economy as the biggest centre, as the biggest government party. They own the economy as an issue, for better or for worse. And for the last year and a bit, that's been for the worse, because the economy is not a source of joy for people, right? Yeah. Now, that's why it's all in on economic growth this year. That's all they're saying. Growth, yes, yes, yes. All of these, a lot of new economic thinking.
Everyone must go.
Yeah, a lot of new economic thinking entering the picture, like advertising tourism to Australians. Christopher Luxon tweeted, "We've got to let the Australians know, the Australians who now and probably every year we've had incoming people, apart from maybe the 12th century, have been the largest source of incoming travellers to New Zealand by quite some margin. We've got to let them know we're open for business. Now, I mean, look, it's easy and fun to dunk on this stuff, but, there isn't any switch you can pull and say, this is economic growth, because if there was, even Grant Robertson would have pulled it eventually. And, it is just a bunch of small things and maybe a few big things like the RMA reform, like fast track, cutting the company tax rate, although I can't really see that happening because of the fiscal problems that would cause for the government accounts. But, that's why they're driving in on this, because, look, very hard to actually affect change in the economy as a government with policy, in the short term, in 6 months, say. So what you really want is for the Reserve Bank cuts interest rates a little bit, and you've made a lot of announcements about growth, and people have a bit more money in their back pockets, and they're like, the government's really coming off.
Look what they've done. They said growth 400 times, and now it doesn't happen. It's the magic beans. It's the magic beans. I mean, it was interesting that the Australian tourism announcement, fronted by the Prime Minister, and they're spending, I think, $500,000. And it's kind of...
What's that, a couple of ads during Neighbours or something?
Weren't they doing that already? Like, you're going to advertise to Australians to come and spend some time in New Zealand. Incredible. Having said that, it did pick up coverage, what agency people would call organic win or whatever. And similarly... one might be a bit skeptical about that, not the digital nomad thing. That got heaps of coverage in international press. Yeah. So that's a sort of win on that basis alone. But there does seem to be a decision that's been made somewhere, probably in PMO, that there must be an announcement or a release on growth every 72 hours, from here until eternity. Similarly in health, to move us quickly onto health, we probably haven't got time to discuss it at length, but since Simeon Brown was appointed health minister, there's been a press release basically every 72 hours about something happening in the health system. There was one that came out.
Was it about people quitting?
No. So weirdly, it's not necessarily aligned with the headlines in the newspaper. Simeon Brown put out a press release 2 days ago announcing that there have been about 54 patients who have had cataract operations at Kaitaia Hospital since the service was introduced in September.
Beat that, Mr. Beast.
It was kind of like, what, and that felt as though they were kind of like, I need a release. We've got to hit the release button now.
Oh, look, Tony Ryle, the only Minister of Health who has ever gone 6 years or even 3 years without any great political incident in the portfolio, and is now accused of having sort of surreptitiously run down services. I often have thoughts on that. But Ryle said to me once in a lift, he was like, one release per day, one press release per day. That's my target. And Ryle would just, and I think it goes beyond just spin, right? In the sense that it is easy when you're reading the headlines to think nothing's happening in health. Shane Reti was sitting in his office alone like a mad king or something, just hearing from his evil counsellors saying, there's no waiting lists, minister, and nothing's happening. But, actually, a lot is happening in the health sector. They are moving on a lot of things. It's not
moving away,
moving there, packing their boxes and moving out.
But I think it's, is anyone who looks at the performance of Health NZ since its creation and is like, oh no, we've lost the senior management. Oh no, stop, don't go.
But there are things that are happening that I think, again, it makes it hard to turn the popularity ship around. I think, was it this week or last week, obstetrics at Whakatane Hospital no longer available. People have to travel all the way to Tauranga. Yep. If you're someone from Ruatoki and you already have to drive far to get into Whakatane, to now add another hour to get all the way to Tauranga, that's hard for whānau. We have a 9% unemployment rate at the moment, for Māori. In those communities, getting the petrol to go that far to have your baby, that is like an economic crisis in and of itself.
Yeah, 100%. And but, look, I think those are the exact things that, Simeon Brown, because he's got this, he has a sort of political radar that maybe Dr. Reti, who's, a fantastic person and physician and, was a good minister, but, maybe, was operating at a slightly higher level. I think those are the sorts of things that, Simeon Brown will see and then, move to address.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, the question there is how much of that is in addressing the optics and how much of that it will be addressing the substance. Because, for example, in transport, a lot of the stuff that was done, like the speed limit, was about sending a message and, what Christopher Luxon might call bumper sticker politics. I mean, there is, on the health issue, we had 3 resignations, but just as interestingly, Simeon Brown hesitating on giving his confidence to Lester Levy, who's the commissioner that replaced the board.
Oh, no, I
confidence.
made an inquiry about that, and apparently that was the minister was a bit blindsided by the reporting of that and didn't believe that was.
He did express his confidence in him in the House when he was asked again. The first time he didn't do that, and it wasn't. He wasn't. It was. I watched the question time, but he has done. He has expressed confidence. There's all this stuff happening with EDs, the Herald investigation into that. The College of Surgeons have raised the alarm this morning on the cuts to the IT systems. And we talked about the drags on the government, and we talked about the economy being the big one. You made the point, Annabelle, that sometimes they dovetail, don't they? The health and the economy. And health is a big thing. There was a Consumer NZ sentiment tracker that came out on Monday, showed that health is judged as a key issue by 39% of respondents, up from 23% a year ago. And I mean, I think that the government understands this and they'll see it in their own numbers. But at a certain point, all of this coalesces, comes together, and it becomes a real political problem.
I think it already is, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the thinking behind the reshuffle, right? Where the 2 headlines were, "Don't worry, we've got our we've got our most manic little political animal in on health, and we've also appointed the new Minister for Economic Growth." And health, yeah, you're right, really been rising since the election. So an election year, I think law and order tended to be sort of number 2 after that sort of clump of cost of living stuff. Either because of the sort of, announcements about things like the gang patch ban or whatever, people just feeling safer, law and order's dropped down, health has really risen. And interestingly enough, and very important for the centre-right parties, when you look at Ipsos, their issues monitor, they break it down by age group. And what you see is it's literally a sort of ascending staircase as the age groups go up. So 18 to 29, it's sort of about the 4th or 5th most important. Once you get to 55 plus, number 1, but with a bullet. And
those people are important because
they vote and they're conservative.
That's kind of, I guess, the brilliant strategy of using law and order as your platform policy, right? Because if you talk about it a lot, people get the impression, even if they're not victims of crime themselves, that they're surrounded by it and they're unsafe. And then once the election campaign is over and you're no longer talking about it, people naturally feel safer because it's not constantly on their radar. But then the reality kicks in, which is that people are still having to, wait for 6 weeks to go to see their GP or for their hip replacement surgery or whatever it might be. And then in the cold light of day, people realise that actually health is a more pressing issue than perhaps law and order ever was.
We need to talk, we've got running out of time, but we need to talk about the Manarewa Marae report, which came out yesterday. It was sort of delayed a number of times, including at one point there was a full announcement of a press conference and then a 11th hour, no, we're not going to do it because for unknown reasons there were people who still wanted to feed into it. The report is into the use of census and COVID-19 vaccination data at the marae. Brian Roche, who's the Public Service Commissioner, called it a massive wake-up call and there was systemic failure. In Stats New Zealand, Health New Zealand, the Health Ministry, who hadn't installed proper safeguards. The boss of Stats New Zealand will stand down, although not immediately. There there's this really elaborate Byzantine network of different agencies and relationships that cover those different ministries and Te Pou Matakana, which is the Whanawara Commissioning Agency, the Waiparere Trust, and Te Pāti Māori. From a political perspective, the most serious allegations wrap in the Waiparere Trust and Te Pāti Māori, and questions around any of that data collected was misused in the lead up to the 2023 election. Nothing has been proven in that regards, and those claims are strongly denied. That was the election in which Penny Henry missed out by 42 votes, I think it was, to Tash Kemp from Te Pāti Māori. This morning, Annabelle
who was the CEO of Manire Whangai, or she was former CEO at the time.
John Tamihere, who is the CEO of the Waiparere Trust and the president of Te Pāti Māori, on Radio New Zealand this morning said that these claims, which I should say have been referred by Roche to the Privacy Commissioner, so they did not reach any conclusions on that part of it. That was referred to the Privacy Commission. There's also an ongoing police investigation, which Te Pāti Māori themselves had requested. It's very complex. Tamihere this morning said that his organisations had been unfairly targeted owing to a prejudice in which there was a view that Māori are somehow crooked, was the word he used. Has he got a point?
I think in terms of prejudice in this particular situation, to me, where it's clear that there's prejudice is the incredibly lackadaisical approach that these government departments took towards protecting the data of Māori. In any other situation or with any other group of New Zealanders, I think that there would have been more in place to ensure that that data was treated appropriately and their privacy was protected. But when it came to, sourcing this information of Māori, that there was just far less care and oversight taken, and kind of almost an approach like, well, all these Maoris know each other, and it's all for good, it's all for good reasons. So off they go. We'll just let them go for it. And I think that's a real problem. When you don't have a lot, your data, is even more valuable because it's one of the few things that you do have, that you do own, that you have mana motuhake and rangatiratanga over, and it should be treated with care.
Does any of that mean that the questions that do still surround the trust and the election and the data should not be probed?
Oh, no, I think it absolutely should be probed. Absolutely, yeah. It has to be.
The thing is, John Tamihere, who I think late last year, Waiparere Trust was deregistered from the charities register because of continuing questions over the use of its funding, which is meant to be used for charitable purposes, for social services, being used for Māori parties, Te Pāti Māori's election campaign launch party, which was held as a Waiparere Trust event. The many questions over loans, and investigations into loans from Waiparere Trust to John Tamihere as a mayoral candidate, to Te Pāti Māori when he was the president. For Tamihere to say this is about, it's because it's a Māori organisation as opposed to it's a John Tamihere organisation, and there is form here and questions about, how these organisations are, conducting the sort of, services for which they're contracted, and we're and in particular, because of the number of times that, concerns were raised during the process. There was an attempt, I think, from early sort of leaks of the report, and various sort of subsidiary reports, I think, that were commissioned by other agencies, by third parties, not government, to what's the word?
Minimise?
Minimise the complaints,
The original complaints.
And the original concerns that were raised. So there is an important issue here, right? Because the success of we hear a lot about devolution of frontline services to Māori and to iwi, to Māori, other Māori service providers as well. it's got to be a very important part of the mix for social services in New Zealand as we move forward. Getting to the highest need communities, also just getting the best out of services. And in a lot of cases, that's because iwi, for instance, or hapu will have very intimate knowledge of their communities. Otherwise, other times it might just be that they have, better, more sort of apt ways of doing things that, parts of the community feel more comfortable with. There are a host of reasons why you need this. And it does rely on a high trust model. You don't want to have this sort of, 1,000 bullet point sort of checklist where you've basically just got to replicate what the Ministry for Social Development does anyway, right? That's not the point. But at the same time, because of that, you really do need accountability and a high level of integrity from these organisations. And for Tamahiri to try and make this about Māori providers in general, as opposed to about his organisations and the specific allegations, I think is really shameful.
The unfortunate thing about it too for Te Pāti Māori is that they've had this extraordinary comeback, rising from the ashes of what was left by the former Māori Party to become a real political force again, polling at levels we've never seen before. And now they have this thing that's going to continue to bubble away, because now we're going to have to wait to see what the Privacy Commissioner says and what comes out of the, any sort of police investigation. And every month that goes by is a month that takes us closer to the election. And just in terms of handing ammunition to to their opponents, it will make it a difficult campaign for them.
Last thing. Mark Brown, the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, I think has just completed a trip to China where a strategic partnership was signed and a couple of memorations of understanding. That has piqued the ire of the New Zealand Foreign Affairs Establishment and the Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, owing to the special relationship that New Zealand and the Cook Islands have. Annabelle, what's your thinking on this front?
I was just doing some reading about Mark recently, and obviously there's concerns within the Cook Islands about what's happened with the passport ideas and the potential of mining and all of those things. But I did think that it was interesting to note that less than a year ago, Mark Brown was deeply concerned by New Zealand's stance on AUKUS and what that meant for small Pacific nations like the Cook Islands, the potential proliferation of nuclear-powered vessels in the Pacific and what it meant for small island nations like his. And, I think in terms of what we're seeing with, what's happened in Gaza, Trump doing press conferences with someone who is wanted by the ICC, the sort of approach where Western countries think that the international rule-based order don't apply to them, but yet want to ensure that, smaller nations adhere to every protocol required in terms of their relationships. It's I'm not surprised that the Cook Islands have said, oh, well, we're not going to consult with you. We're just going to go off and sign this thing with China.
Well, I think it's really rough that they didn't consult with us, because given events out of the US, maybe they could put in a good word. Maybe we could give them a note to the Chinese.
Yeah. Chris says hi. Chris and Winston says hi. Ni hao.
Yeah, very good. We will return soon with more sizzling conversation. Thanks for your company. Kia ora, bye.
The Spin-off Podcast Network.